Hey everyone, David Tarras here, head of the Federal Criminal Defense Practice at the Rossen Law Firm. What we're going to talk about in today's video is something that we've been seeing a lot down here in South Florida, where we're based in the Southern District of Florida, and I'm sure it's happening in many other districts around the country, related to federal firearms offenses, specifically the concept of straw purchasing or straw buying of firearms. Now, these investigations, we believe, based on our research and what we're seeing, specifically as far as it relates to funding that the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Agency, ATF, is receiving, is unsurprisingly, I think, related to the current state of gun violence in the country. So again, it's not surprising, but we are seeing a lot of very good people get tied up in investigations regarding straw purchasing that we represent that probably otherwise wouldn't have in the past. And ATF and the federal government and the Department of Justice are taking a really, really close look at the purchasing of firearms in an effort to try and most likely stem the unlawful trading of firearms around the country. This is a very tough time for these prosecutions. It's a very tough atmosphere, and you need an attorneys like the attorneys at the Rossen Law Firm to be able to navigate this very sensitive topic involving firearms in today's society, because it is very serious. So the way that we kind of see these investigations start is usually somebody gets pulled over with a firearm, might be a traffic stop, it might be for some other sort of offense or investigation. The local law enforcement, and this is not the only way, but it's a common way, local law enforcement may find a firearm in the car, and they will do their traces and their investigation into the origins of the firearm, seeing whether it's ever been reported stolen, also checking databases to see when it may have been purchased, and they will then go follow a paper trail of where the firearm was originally purchased. And local law enforcement has been getting ATF, has been getting the feds involved very commonly in these investigations when they find someone with a firearm in order to determine how this individual ended up with this firearm. And when I say this individual, we're talking about individuals who are usually prohibited from owning a firearm. If this was someone who gets stopped with a lawful concealed carry permit or otherwise lawful purchase of the firearm, not so likely. Usually this individual should not have been in possession of a firearm, perhaps because they were a convicted felon or did not have citizenship in this country, and then this federal trace back really starts. So what ATF specifically is looking for, and what this whole concept of straw purchasing is, they go back to the federal firearms dealer. Okay, any dealer who is selling firearms, specifically in the Southern District of Florida, a majority of dealers are going to be required to have a federal firearms license. If somebody goes to purchase a firearm from a federal firearms licensed dealer, they're going to have to fill out an ATF form in order to do so. That ATF form is known as ATF Form 4473. And this licensed firearm dealer is required by federal law to have everybody who is purchasing a firearm from this dealer fill out this form. And the person who is purchasing this firearm is doing so under penalty of perjury, and also penalties of what we're talking about today, which is making a false statement to a federally licensed firearm dealer. Pursuant to Title 18, United States Code Section 922A6, it is unlawful for any person in connection with the acquisition of a firearm to make a false or fictitious statement that is intended or likely to deceive a licensed firearm dealer. So 922A6 is the statute that the straw purchasing or straw buying allegations and these prosecutions in federal criminal court are brought under. And what we see happen is someone, now tracing back to the original purchase, someone who is alleged to have gone in to a licensed firearms dealer, filled out this ATF form 4473, and on this form, the individual who is purchasing the firearm has to swear that they are, if they indeed are, they have to swear that they are the individual who is going to be taking possession of the firearm that they are purchasing, that the firearm is not going to be transferred to what the form and ATF refers to as a transferee. Okay, this firearm, if you check the box on this form that the firearm is for you, then it has to be for you. And this whole concept of straw purchasing comes in when ATF tracks down the purchase and they track down the ATF form. They see that the individual who purchased the firearm checked off on the ATF form that they were the actual buyer and that the firearm was intended for their own possession and not intended to be transferred. And if that firearm ended up with someone else, that is the major red flag. That kicks off the investigation and the prosecution, because this crime of lying on an ATF form or straw purchasing, it is a very serious federal offense. It's punishable by up to 10 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. So we're talking about serious exposure here, and it is a felony. It is a federal felony. Even a plea will require a conviction. You become a convicted felon. It's very serious. So as law enforcement, as ATF are investigating these, it's extremely important that you hire an experienced attorney. We have a lot of experience with these cases here at the Rossen Law Firm. There are many things that we can do to try and stem the tide or prevent the prosecution from turning poor for our client, and to make sure that our client receives the best possible result in these cases, whether it is through plea negotiations or through a trial. Because at the end of the day, just lying on the form itself, the form is the form. The box will be checked. There are ways to challenge the investigation. There are definite challenges in any case. We have to look through all of the evidence, but it's really the transferring of the firearm that makes things extremely important, and there is a lot of things we can attack there because intent is still required, okay? Knowledge is still required. You have the individuals who are purchasing the firearms, our clients who have purchased the firearm from the dealer and then are alleged to have transferred the firearm to somebody else. And you have the individual, the client, who may come to us and say they were the recipient of the firearm, and they then can get tied into a conspiracy to transfer firearms, a conspiracy to make false representations on an ATF form, okay, which gets into a conspiracy regarding straw buying and straw purchasing. The buyer, which I guess we would call the transferor based on the government's allegations, and the person who receives the firearm they refer to as the transferee. Now, there is an exception here, okay, to this requirement to report on this form, which is if the individual who the firearm was transferred to was a bona fide purchaser. A bona fide recipient is the proper way to say it, okay? So it's very important to find a firm like ours who understands what it means to be bona fide, and essentially what that means is no sort of remuneration, nothing was promised by the person who was given the firearm from the individual who bought the firearm from the licensed dealer. Nothing was promised in return for any in any way possible. It was a pure gift, not even a pack of gum in return. It has to be completely a gift, and then you are safe from that. And ATF, they do have tunnel vision about these. They don't always do a full investigation to really find out if there was this intent to violate these codes regarding the transfer of firearm, because a lot of people, especially in South Florida, believe that you can gift firearms to other individuals. That you can do a bill of sale. There are things that can be explored in each one of these cases in order to prevent you from having liability or to mitigate and reduce your exposure for a potential straw buying or straw purchasing of a firearm case in South Florida. And when we're talking about these cases and these allegations, we have other videos on the federal sentencing guidelines, and it's extremely important for you to watch those to understand how federal sentencing works. But these cases, not only is the maximum sentence by law high, 10 years, up to 10 years in federal prison and a very large fine, and of course the huge consequences that come with a felony conviction, but the guidelines themselves and the points that can be attributed to these cases can also very much raise your potential exposure to prolonged time in prison, incarceration as well. For example, the number of firearms involved, whether or not the individual who was doing the transfer had cause or reason to believe that the person who they were transferring the firearm allegedly to was a prohibited person, perhaps was a convicted felon, didn't have the right to own a firearm for different reasons, okay? So that intent aspect of the actual transfer from the initial buyer to the individual who ends up with the firearm is also extremely important for us to look into, because criminal intent cannot be ruled out. The government wants you to think that intent is always inferred just by what you fill out in the document, just by what you do in your actions, but no. Criminal intent still has to be proven. So if you do believe that you may be under investigation for straw buying or straw purchasing of firearms in South Florida or anywhere around the country, please contact the Rossen Law Firm and we will talk to you about how we can help.